For those of you who are familiar with who I am, then you know that I have been making videos related to animation for many years now. In fact, I'm pretty much at the point where about half of my life now has been dedicated to being animat and talking about my interests, rather it be with animation, Disney, Muppets, Epic Mickey, or what have you. I've been doing this for quite some time with literally hundreds of videos where I would go and express myself and express my interests through history videos, through reviews, and so much more. However, throughout my time when talking about animation, I can't help but notice that there has been a cataclysmic downfall with one entity in the world of animation. And the most shocking thing about it is that it is one that not many people seem to want to really talk about. Not only are there few people who would openly go and discuss about this problem, but there are many others who are willing to go and flat out ignore it, thinking that if they don't acknowledge it, then somehow the problem would go away. But of course, that is not the case, because especially in recent years, they have just been getting worse and worse and worse, to the point that now the problems are becoming so frequent that it's becoming difficult to go and catch up. And what I'm talking about specifically is not related to a studio or company. It's not related to a prominent figure in the animation industry. It's not regarding one specific individual. It's not regarding a franchise. It's not related to a movie or a series or any form of cartoon. What I'm talking about specifically is in regards to the cartoon community. Or this goes by many different names. Some say the animation community, the animation fan base, the cartoon fandom. Basically, the group of fans, specifically those who are active on social media, that openly express or mainly express their interest in animation. That is the entity that is having a cataclysmic downfall right now. That is the group that now more than ever, they have become more and more and more toxic. And I believe it is time that we need to have an open discussion that there is a serious problem with the community. And not only should we go and address it, but we need to start taking action in holding accountability if we ever wish to go and save the fandom and, in a way, saving animation itself. Now, with all of these names, just to go and make a clarification right now that throughout this video, I will be referring to them as the cartoon community, just so we can go and have some consistency going on. But for those of you who still do follow me, you may have noticed that I have been more openly critical towards the cartoon community, especially on my Blue Sky account and also on my podcast, Animat's Crazy Cartoon Cast. But also, on top of that, you may have also seen that even in my videos, I've also started to go and be more critical in regards to their behavior and the problems that are currently happening within the fandom. So from there, I ultimately decided, and this is something that I will admit right now, I have been contemplating to create this video for quite some time, but I feel like now would be the perfect opportunity to go and express myself in terms of all the problems that I have had with the community, at least from my personal perspective. I know that there are others who will have their own issues with the group that they could go and express, but this is just more from my perspective and make one big video just to go and summarize all the issues and all the problems that they have been having, and that we need to go and call this out. So that's basically the main purpose of this entire video. It will be lengthy, as you probably see in the time frame, but you will see that there is a lot to cover in terms of their problems, and especially with the toxicity that is only growing. And honestly, it really is at the point that if nothing is going to get done, it's only going to get worse and worse and worse. So as of this video, this is in terms of the problems that they have now. You never know if in the future that these problems are going to grow more significantly, or there's going to be an increasing amount of issues that this community is going to have. So either way, either if I would go and save it for later, or if I do it now, it wouldn't make much of a difference. There is a clear problem, and again, it needs to be addressed. Now, before I go and fully get into these problems, I want to go and make a few disclaimers. And these will be disclaimers that I will be repeating throughout this video, just so we can go and make things fully clear about what I am talking about here. And even with these disclaimers, we can go and fully understand the full situation, how we could go and properly take action, and that we can have a full understanding of what I am talking about here. Now, the first thing I want to address is that even though I will be specifically discussing about the cartoon community, these are issues that, of course, will also be attributed to fandom culture as a whole. Maybe you are a part of a different kind of fandom, and maybe the list of things that I will be saying, they sound familiar, and that maybe there are problems in there as well. So in a way, this isn't just going to be about the cartoon community, but this is also problems with fandoms in general. And even though, again, I'm mainly going to be talking about the cartoon community, I do encourage you to go and address these problems if they are also part of the fandom that you're in as well. So that's one thing I want to go and highlight. The second thing that I want to address, and this is going to be something that I will be repeating, is that this is not going to reflect on all animation fans. I do acknowledge that there are still many animation fans out there that are still cool, that are still great, and that the toxicity that is within the group, this only reflects upon a minority. However, this toxicity is still loud and proportionate enough to cause some serious problems. If it were just a small group of people, like just an insignificant amount that's just doing this, I wouldn't even be making this video in the first place. But considering the proportion of it and how they could be quite extreme and that their actions can have some real world consequences, well, it's worth addressing. So again, this doesn't reflect upon everyone. This is just in regards to the toxic minority, but still, this toxic minority is still quite a problem. And it could be debatable on who is participating in this, because it could be a little bit more than you may think. It is a minority, but still quite a sized minority in there. And number 3, and this is possibly the most important one, please do not go and harass anybody that I mention in this video. Now, I will go and name a few names in the industry and in the community as well as highlighting some social media posts as well. But whoever I would go and highlight and whoever I would go and talk about, please do not go and harass anyone. In fact, this is one of the problems that I will be highlighting later in this, but it is still worth mentioning right now. And I mean, more than ever nowadays, it is important to go and actually make people remember that harassment is never good. And also, on a side note, I just want to go and say that I really do hope that this is not going to be the only video that will go and address the problems with the cartoon community. And luckily, there have been a few that do actually talk about it, even before I even started this. So with that said, there will be links in the description to a few people that I want to go and highlight and that I highly recommend that you go and check them out to go and see their perspective with the problems with the cartoon community. One example is the YouTube channel Smarty Pants, whom he has been addressing through numerous of videos with many of the issues related to the cartoon community, and that their behavior can be the main problem than whatever problem that they're complaining about. And there's also a series that I would like to go and highlight that, as I'm recording this, it has already begun, in which it chronicles the history of the cartoon community and where is it that they went terribly wrong. And this is started by an animator whom on YouTube calls himself Burb666. And this is something that I actually did help participate. I was one of the people that he interviewed for the video series and have been a bit close to him, like catching up on updates on what he has been doing with his production. So I just want to go and give a shout out to Burb and highly recommend that you go and check his channel out, as well as Smarty Pants and whoever I would put in the link in the description. So hopefully this is not going to be the only video that you will watch in terms of the problems with the cartoon community. You can also go and check them out as well. So with all that said, let's actually get into the problems with the cartoon community. And the first one I want to go and highlight is probably the most common complaint in regards to the cartoon community, which is how they use the mantra, animation is cinema. Ah, yes, there was a time when animation is cinema used to be an admirable term, a term in which highlights that animation is not how the public perceives as just a kid's genre, but rather an artistic medium that should be taken seriously. One who can go and craft amazing stories and create beautiful art that more people should go and pay attention to and actually experience. Nowadays, however, it is often considered to be a joke where cartoon fans would go and use this as a desperate attempt to want to go and be taken seriously, and that they want the stuff that they watch to also be taken seriously as well. It feels more like a desperate call of action, more so than a genuine saying to go and honor the medium that it wants to go and respect. Now, there are different ways that many people can see how the animation is cinema mantra and the way that the cartoon community would go and use it. There are many different interpretations of how it can go and be a problem. But through my perspective, I feel like the big issue with how the cartoon community sees animation as cinema is that it highly warps their perspective on whatever they watch to where their standard now becomes incredibly high. I would even say it's almost impossibly high, where there can only be a selected few that they could go and approve. Because for the cartoon community with that mindset, they cannot just go and watch an animated film or an animated show or any form of cartoon, and then they could just walk out and say, I like it, I enjoyed it. You know, they can't just do that because they have a long list that they want to go and check out in order to make sure that the cartoon can actually go and ultimately meet their criteria. Because it's not enough for them to just enjoy it. They mainly want to go and want to use that cartoon in order to go and advance their narrative that animation is cinema. And even if there are just a few marks that it didn't pass, they would go and completely reject it. It would just mean absolutely nothing to them. So it's not enough for them to like it. It also depends on what critics are saying, what word of mouth is saying about the project, if it could meet that massive approval in terms of getting critical praise and praise from the audience as well. There is also how successful it could do either on streaming or at the box office, if it could get massive views on whatever streaming platform it's on, or if it could really rank up the money at the box office. And then possibly later on, it would also depend on how many awards it could go and get, and if it can be a big winner on the best animated feature category or the best animated series category at the Emmys or stuff like that. And then there's also how viral it can be on the internet, like in terms of the memes or the posts when people would go and talk about, or how much fan art people would go and dedicate to making it. And the list goes on from there. It needs to be an absolute masterpiece. It needs to be like an absolute phenomenon in order to get the cartoon community's approval so that they can go and use that cartoon in order to go and say animation is cinema. And even if there is something that does meet all that criteria that they can go and actually use to go and say animation is cinema, sometimes the way that they would go and present it can actually be for all the wrong reasons, and that it would feel more disingenuous if they even like the project in the first place. And possibly the greatest example that I could think of is in regards to the competition that the fans have created of K-pop Demon Hunters versus Elio. Now, you may remember back in the summer of 2025, those two animated features came out on the same day, one in which came out on streaming and the other came out in theaters. And considering how the cartoon community have always pleaded for more original creations to go and be made, especially in this day and age of cinema that is heavily reliant on IPs, sequels, remakes, and more, you would think that would be a moment to go and really celebrate, especially for the cartoon community, in which on the same day, they got not one, but two original animated features from two high-profile animation studios. Especially in the case of Elio, considering that it is a new original animated feature from Pixar, and it actually helps to go and disprove the many claims that people would go and say that, oh, Disney nowadays is just doing nothing but sequels and remakes and all that kind of crap. At least it does show that they are trying to put in effort in order to go and actually release more original works. And it's also very nice as well that both of these films actually did at least meet the criteria of actually getting both positive word of mouth as well as getting critics' approval, both of which getting high praise from critics ranging from being good to great, as well as audiences coming out saying that they actually did enjoy both of those movies. Now, you would think the cartoon community would be happy with the fact that they got two great original animated features, but unfortunately, that is not what happened. Because in terms of the performance of how they've done, K-pop Demon Hunters ended up becoming very successful, where it went on to become the biggest movie on streaming and became a massive phenomenon, while Elio, on the other hand, unfortunately became a box office flop. And from there, considering that K-pop Demon Hunters is much easier to go and use and to present that animation is cinema much more than Elio, what ultimately happened was that many fans would go and use K-pop Demon Hunters to go and straight up attack Disney and Elio, basically shaming the Pixar film for not being successful and framing its financial failure as a failure to the movie itself, which is why you then see people accusing Disney of the Cal art style or using the beam mouth, trying to be more critical and throw in a lot of hate and basically weaponizing K-pop Demon Hunters as a way to go and attack Disney. And this is just one of the many examples of when the cartoon community ultimately goes into tribalism and turns animated projects into this massive competition where suddenly they react the same way as sports fans would do, where they ultimately want to see a winner and a loser and would really put in a lot of their energy on just straight up attacking the loser, of just shaming the loser for being the loser. In fact, in this example of K-pop and Elio, there are some people out there whom they don't actually care about K-pop Demon Hunters. They don't think it's a good movie, or that they've admitted that they've never watched it, but they just want to go and jump on the bandwagon just to have an additional excuse to go and hate on Disney and slam on Elio. And that's why whenever I see this trend of tribalism happen, and you see all these people who would go out of their way to try to highly elevate one and then take down the other, it honestly makes me question if they really genuinely are fans of the things that they want to go and elevate in the first place. Like, if we use this example of K-pop and Elio, if you would force these types of fans to go and say, which one are you? Are you a fan of K-pop or are you a hater of Elio? And you have to force them to not say both, because that's just the stupid easy way out in order to go and try to dodge the question. Which one do you think they would choose? Because honestly, with that kind of mentality that people would go into, it's honestly a lot more likely that they would say they just want to hate Elio more so than they genuinely want to say that they love K-pop Demon Hunters. Because when it comes to these types of fans, or on the more toxic side of the cartoon community, they would rather go and communicate in terms of the things that they want to hate more so than just talk about the things that they want to enjoy. They're more likely to go and try to slam on Elio more so than they want to go and just say the things that they like about K-pop Demon Hunters. Oh, and by the way, before I go and continue, there is something that I want to go and address as well, because I can already hear some keyboards typing and people who are ready to go and pull this card up in order to make some kind of counter argument against me. Because I know that it's going to happen, and I know it's still happening to this day, where people will go and point out the whole Sony Pictures Animation controversy with me. I know that there are going to be those people who will go bring up that I was once a toxic member of the cartoon community as well, and that I've made hyperbolic and extremely anger-inducing rants regarding some of their past films like Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, Hotel Transylvania, The Emoji Movie, and more, and that some of my comments went way too far, and that I've been very disrespectful towards the people who have worked on those movies. I know for a fact that many people will want to go and use that excuse in order to shut me up. And to that, I just want to go and say, I understand. Because yes, I did absolutely fuck up during that time. Yes, I let my emotions get the best of me, and I went way too far with my comments on both Sony Pictures Animation and those movies that they have produced. Yes, sure, maybe my opinions hasn't really changed. I don't think that Cloudy or Hotel Transylvania are good movies in the first place, but I do acknowledge now that these are nothing more than just my opinions, and they're no different than when people say that Cloudy and Hotel Transylvania are great movies. What happened to me was that I really got into that whole animation is cinema mentality, and it ended up getting the best of me where, yeah, back then I was pretty uncontrollable with my emotions. Yeah, I did not handle those situations very well, and it did ultimately lead to backlash that I ultimately deserved. And at that point, I worked very hard over the years in order to grow from that whole experience, to go and fully move on from having that entire attitude and to have a new perspective, not just on Sony Pictures Animation, but also on animation in general. And I will say that I think I am confident enough to say that I am no longer that person that I used to be. That, yes, I do acknowledge that what I have done back then was absolutely wrong. And I don't blame people if they don't want to forgive me for the things that I have said, rather it be from fans of those movies or from the people whom actually did work on those productions. If you don't like me for what I've done in the past, honestly, I don't blame you on that. But I have done my best in order to go and improve my behavior and apply that not just on Sony, but just from my perspective on animation as a whole. And yeah, lately I've been doing a lot better, even when Sony Animation doesn't put out a good movie, like with Hotel Transylvania, Transformania, for example. I've learned to go and improve upon my criticisms, the way that I talk about the people in the productions. I've done a lot of work in order to be better. And the only thing that I can hope for from there is that maybe other people can actually notice that I have put in the effort to go and improve. But with all that said, during that whole time that I've kind of rehabilitated myself from that angry phase, and from that phase when I was in that entire animation is cinema mentality, I did unfortunately gain a bit of a fear that the cartoon community would not learn the lessons that I have, that they would not learn about what is it that I have done wrong, and that they would end up doing those same mistakes where they would end up hurting others more so than actually doing good, where they would go and say things that they would end up regretting, just like what I have. And unfortunately, it is at the point where I would say that fear has sadly become a reality, and that the cartoon community, or at least those that are more in the toxic category, they only see what is on the surface, and they don't focus necessarily on the behavior, but just on the targets, that they think that certain toxic behaviors are perfectly fine to go and express as long as it's towards the right targets, that I was only wrong because I did that behavior towards films like Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs and Hotel Transylvania. But if I would go and express that behavior on other projects that the cartoon community would consider to be worthy to go and hate and attack and stuff like that, I probably would not receive as much backlash as I have. And you know what the worst part is? I know a perfect example of a Sony Pictures Animation movie in which the cartoon community's behavior, or at least the toxic side of it, went way too far. And I would even dare say that it is so extreme, even surpassing what I have done in terms of how I used to express my thoughts on Sony Pictures Animation, in which it is their turn to go and show off their massive hate boner for Sony and just straight up not just attacking the movie, but also attacking the people who worked on it. And you know the craziest thing about it? It's actually quite a recent example with Hexed. And it's honestly very funny with Hexed, because on paper, you would think that this is a dream project for the cartoon community, something that they would absolutely go and use to go and display that animation is cinema. It's from Sony Pictures Animation, and especially around the same time during the peak of K-pop Demon Hunter's popularity. It is a long-time passion project from Genndy Tartakovsky, one of the most admirable figures in animation today. It's 2D animated, to which is something that animation fans have been begging to see make a comeback. And it is an R-rated film to which they can go and show that animation is also for adults. However, Fix ultimately came out as one of, if not the most hated animated feature of 2025. And it's one thing if the cartoon community would just go and express that they don't like this film and they thought that it was terrible, but there have been some reactions that would go and take it way too far. And I don't just mean some of the more stupid entitlements of saying that, oh, this is a disgrace to animation, this is a disgrace to art, this is the death of 2D animation, and all that kind of pretentious snobby bullcrap. But at the same time, there have also been some fans who take it way too far, and they would go and make some extreme claims towards both Genndy Tartakovsky and the animators who have worked on it. There are some people who claim that Genndy Tartakovsky is zoophile and that he has a kink for animals in heat. And especially, there are some toxic fans who would actually go as far as to straight up harass anybody who would go and mention that they have worked on Fixed, where they would bombard them with so much verbal abuse that some animators had no choice but silence their own contribution to Fix just to go and stop all that harassment. And listen, I understand why there are some people who hate Fix or think that it's one of the worst animated films in recent years. I understand that for some people, they're not into those sex jokes and that the movie can be way too much for them. Even I will say right now, I'm not into Fix. I don't really think it's that great or even good of a movie. Now, I wouldn't go and say that I think the film is just flat out terrible. I have expressed in my review that I do think that it is a minor step up compared to some of Sony's past films like Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs and Hotel Transylvania, but I don't really think it's that good of a movie either. And yet, I just find it so perplexing that there are some toxic fans who are just so enraptured by their own anger that they don't see what is wrong with their actions. They believe that Fix is just so not up to their standard that they think it's justifiable to get so angry and to just straight up attack not just the movie, but anybody who was involved. It honestly made me wonder, has nobody ever stopped to think, hey, maybe we shouldn't be acting like that Sony hater with the orange hat. Maybe we shouldn't be acting like that guy when it comes to this movie. Yeah, it sucks, but maybe we should be a little bit more respectful about it, or at least be more respectful with the people who are involved. And what's even crazier is that there are legit some people who are more upset at me than they are at people who harass the animators at Fix. There are some people who got seriously upset over the fact that I would go out of my way to call out the bad behavior that is being expressed when it comes to Fix. That people are more mad at me that I called out the harassers than the actual harassers themselves. Or even more insane is that there are more people who are mad that I said that Fix is better than Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs and Hotel Transylvania than they are at the people who would go and harass the animators. And that is the point where, going back to what I was saying, unfortunately, there are people out there who only see the targets and not the behavior, where they see nothing in terms of what is wrong with the behavior, and they only see the targets and they think that alone should be justifiable in terms of whatever behavior that would be expressed by the cartoon community. Or again, in terms of the toxic side of the cartoon community. And furthermore, I would even say that this is even further proof that those who use K-pop demon hunters to go and attack Elio, they are not fans of either K-pop demon hunters or Sony Pictures Animation, considering that they expressed no cares whatsoever about the people behind the scenes, where, again, this was during the time when K-pop Demon Hunters was at its absolute peak of its popularity. And yet, even with all the love that that movie is expressing, they are showing absolutely no respect for the people who are in that studio and would have no problem whatsoever to go and straight up attack the colleagues of the animators of K-pop Demon Hunters. Not to mention that this is also something that really shows a massive loophole or a massive plot hole in terms of their big narrative of how Sony Pictures Animation is dominating the whole medium and stuff like that. You probably have seen like a few videos or a few people who would go and express that now Sony Animation is the new kings of animation. But where does Fixed fit in that narrative? Where is it that they would go and apply Fix in that entire story? Because that would honestly feel like a flaw to their whole argument, especially when this is a movie that they absolutely hate, arguably even more than the hatred that they would go and express with Elio. So that alone right there shows this massive hypocrisy that is within the community where, again, they only see the targets and not necessarily the behavior. Where if being a hater towards a project like Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs is straight up wrong, but doing the exact same thing and then some towards a project like Fixed, then for some reason that seems to be okay. However, Fix is just a minor example of the double standards in the cartoon community, because there is a much more grand example of the sheer hypocrisy where now it's the toxic side of the cartoon community's turn to go and fully display their hate boner, down to the point where there are some in the community where they have made their entire personalities just on hating this one particular studio and going after every single project that they would bring out. And that is Disney. I know many people are not ready to have this conversation, but we're at the point where we need to go and start talking about how the Disney hate is starting to become rather problematic, and that people are starting to go a little bit too far with their emotions in regards to Disney and the projects that they would release. And I'm not just talking about some of their weaker stuff that they would bring out, such as the Disney live action remakes, although that's often been considered one of the major reasons to go and hate on the company. But I'm also talking about many of the other films that they would go and release as well, especially when it comes to their animated features. And this would range from the ones from Disney Animation, from films like Ralph Breaks the Internet, Raya and the Last Dragon, Strange World, Wish, and Moana 2, as well as Pixar, where even some of their movies would go and get heavily attacked on, such as Toy Story 4, Incredibles 2, Lightyear, Elio, and several others. Of course, there are a few exceptions, but there have been very few studios nowadays that would receive a tremendous amount of hate and consistently get that amount of hatred than Disney. But of course, this is not to go and defend Disney whatsoever, because they are still a multi-billion-dollar corporation, and as such, they have done plenty of actions in which they deserve to be called out on. These include suppression of LGBTQ plus representation in their stories, frequently doing mass layoffs because the executives say so, often fighting against unions, continuously enabling AI, controversial working conditions like at Pixar or at the Disney parks, getting a little carried away with their prices in terms of their products and services, like, again, at the Disney parks where everything feels like it's way too expensive, and so on and so forth. So, of course, there are many times when we should be calling out against Disney, and that it is a good thing that we stand against the company. And a great example is with the whole Jimmy Kimmel controversy, when Disney complied to the orders of Trump and the FCC to go and cancel Kimmel, which ultimately led to serious backlash against the company to the point that they had to go and reinstate his show. Like, that is a moment that that, of course, Disney were the bad guys and that they need to be called out on that. However, while there are some things that Disney would do in which it is justified to go after them, I feel like when it comes to whatever reasons that the cartoon community may have to go after Disney or whatever reasons they may have to go and antagonize them, I feel like the grand majority of them are honestly insignificant or very petty. The kind in which that feels more like fandom whining more so than anything that would actually cause real world harm or anything that would actually hurt any of the employees working there. Again, it would either be things that just feels extremely petty where this is like beyond first world problems. They could possibly be over things that are not even true, and it's just reactionary behavior where they just want to shoot first and ask questions later. They could sound extremely repetitive where all they're doing is just repeat the same things over and over and over again. And that's especially the case when it comes to their complaints with the live action remakes, to the point where those complaints are now becoming as tiring as the remakes themselves. Or they let their behavior go fully unchecked, where they present themselves as extremely unstable and really go hyperbolic with their opinions to the point where they sound no differently than how I was acting in my Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs reviews. And it really doesn't help either when a lot of them would completely ignore the more legitimate reasons to go after Disney because they would consider it to be political. Like, there are some fans out there who are more upset over the existence of Wish compared to what happened with the whole controversy of Jimmy Kimmel. And in that regards, I just feel like their priorities are just not straight in there. And again, it's one thing to go and criticize their works, to go and say that, you know, they didn't like the experience that they got with their movies and stuff like that. But there are some people that honestly take it way too far. And because hating Disney is so popular within that bubble, they end up normalizing that behavior, that they believe that, well, I see everyone else is doing it. Maybe it's okay if I do it, without checking in on their behavior or without even checking in on how far they would go and take it for the sake of just attacking Disney. So a lot of it is more in regards to either entitlement or it's just for the sake of bandwagoning. Again, there are many legitimate reasons to go after Disney, but if it's because you hate Wish so much or you think that Lightyear just insults you with its mere existence alone, then that's not really a valid reason to really go and just unleash your emotions against them. And the anger that this group has against Disney has now become so bad that I can't help but feel like now the definition of what is a Disney adult has become so warped and confusing that really to go and figure out what does it mean to be a Disney adult, well, it really does vary now from person to person. And before I continue, I just want to go and say, yes, I am fully aware about what is behind me right here. I am very well aware of what's on my shelves and what's on my desk and stuff like that. And you may find a bunch of different Disney paraphernalia where some people might think that if they look around the screen of like where I am here, they would think that, oh, I am a Disney adult. But again, what does it mean to be a Disney adult? Because now it really does vary from person to person in terms of what is the actual definition. Now, some may say that a Disney adult is the kind of person that 90% or 95% of the time, the only thing that they could talk about, the only thing that they consume is exclusively Disney. You know, the kind of people who would go to the Disney parks monthly or weekly, or if they would go and make posts on social media, the grand majority of the time is only about Disney. So there are those kinds of people in which, yeah, they are just nothing about Disney and their whole personality is almost exclusively just Disney. But at the same time, though, there are those people who would say that a Disney adult is not someone who is 100% against Disney and just about everything that they would go and release nowadays. Sure, there might be those rare few exceptions that would get a pass, such as Encanto and Zootopia 2. But there are those people who would say that if you are not 100% against Disney and you're not angry against them for releasing whatever new movie that would come out or whatever thing that they would go and do that may seem a little bit controversial or that it isn't 100% perfect, then there are going to be those people that will go and label you as a Disney adult or a Disney shill or what have you, just because you decided to go and step away from the angry mob and you decided to say, oh, you know what, something like Strange World is actually enjoyable. Or if you would go and dare say that you actually like one of the Disney live action remakes that Disney would go and put out nowadays, there is a likelihood that there will be a group of those people that will go after you thinking that you're the enemy or that you're a slave to the Disney Corporation or whatever hyperbolic term that they want to go and antagonize you for not going into that same crusade as them for attacking Disney. So that's why with the whole definition of a Disney adult, it could either be something that is massively broad or it could be massively specific. I don't know. I feel like right now with the Disney hatred, people can really get carried away, not just with their opinions on Disney, but also with how they view how others would go and consume Disney. So in that regards, I feel like there is at a point where, of course, not everyone, but there are some people out there who have a massive bias against Disney to the point that it really has become problematic with not just how they approach whatever project the company would go out, but also with their interactions with others and how they would ultimately communicate with others, that they can only vibe with those that share that massive bias against Disney, that thinks that everything that Disney does is evil and that there's no such thing as a good new Disney thing whatsoever, with somehow the magical few exceptions that they would just, enjoy it for that little moment and then sweep it under the rug so they could just go back to hating Disney. So it really just makes that definition so confusing. And this is not to mention, by the way, that I honestly do find that the hatred towards Disney specifically is a bit ridiculous and that it really does narrow the community's perspective, considering that honestly, this is something that I have learned when I grew past my hatred with Sony Pictures Animation, is that ultimately all of these studios are pretty much the same. It doesn't matter if it's either Disney or Universal or with their studios like with Illumination or DreamWorks, or it doesn't matter with Sony or with Paramount or with Lionsgate or what have you, all these studios, or with Netflix also, it doesn't matter. All of these studios are the same. And it's honestly wild. Like when people would just go after Disney, I find that it's honestly ineffective. And I'm not saying that because it's wrong that they're going after Disney. I just find that it's honestly ineffective in terms of the cause that they want to go after, because there are those people who only go after Disney in terms of some of the more legitimate things to go after them, rather it be with LGBTQ plus suppression, with AI, with working conditions, or what have you. Like, there are some people who believe it's only Disney who does that, and yet with some of the other studios, they don't do anything bad at all for some reason. Like, here are some good examples. There are a lot of people who will go after Disney in terms of that LGBTQ plus suppression, in terms of taking the stories that are in production and that they would take away any representation of an LGBTQ plus person. But how many people are also upset at DreamWorks and NBC Universal, whom, as I'm recording this, are facing a lawsuit in which alleges discrimination against a trans editor, specifically someone who has worked on The Bad Guys 2, and the working conditions that they face was a nightmare, especially because of one person who really went after them because of their trans identity. And because of that, they reported it and the situation was solved. But then afterwards, DreamWorks then allegedly disposed of them, like basically felt like because they're a trans person that they felt like they were more of a nuisance to the company. And that's why there is this lawsuit that is now going on. Again, this is all allegations, of course, but still though, this is a situation that feels like might be even worse because now this is actually affecting real world people instead of affecting fictional characters and changing their identity for the sake of having a safer story. Now, you would think that with the community that they would really go and jump onto DreamWorks' case if they really do care about the LGBTQ plus community, but it feels like, honestly, you don't hear about it as much as something that Disney would go and do in terms of however they would go and handle LGBTQ plus representation, let alone how they would go and handle LGBTQ plus workers. Now, some may say it's a little bit of a different story. And yes, again, it is all allegations when it comes to this lawsuit. But still, though, the fact that the real big lawsuit right there doesn't have the Disney name doesn't seem to carry a lot of attention as much if it would go and have the Disney name on it. Or here's another example. You know how there's been some reported controversial working conditions going on at Pixar, especially with productions such as Inside Out 2, down to the point where there are people who have a grudge against that movie in particular? Well, how many of those people are also equally as upset at Sony Pictures Animation and especially the productions of Phil Lord and Chris Miller, such as Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, especially after the Vulture article was released? Yes, at the time, it definitely caught a lot of attention and some people did indeed talk about it, but how long people went on to go and hold on to that grudge against either Sony or Lord and Miller or even Spider-Verse especially feels like it was a lot shorter than what Pixar would still be getting nowadays. Now, I just want to go and also make a clarification that as I'm recording this, even though we don't have an update in terms of that situation, and maybe there is a likelihood that maybe Lord and Miller have improved upon their behavior and maybe the working conditions have improved there as well. And I mean, you can also say the same thing with Pixar, but still though, how many people would hold on to that grudge towards Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse because of how the animators were treated there compared to Inside Out 2 with the way that the animators were treated there? Or how about any time we hear Disney wants to be involved with AI and people immediately give hell to Disney for even thinking about the idea to be involved with that technology whatsoever? But how many of those people are also calling out Netflix, where they are continuously doubling down on wanting to use AI even to the point of actually opening up a new animation studio that is dedicated to making AI animation. How many of those people giving crap to Disney is also giving crap to Netflix on that? Now, with these examples, I am not saying that people only go after Disney and let all those others give a pass. Of course, those other companies are also getting crap as well for those. But the proportion in terms of what Disney is getting compared to what others are getting, you could tell that there is a massive difference. And again, that is especially the case when some people just want to jump into it for the sake of the bandwagon of hating Disney. So that's just one thing I really want to go and highlight, how this Disney hate can be a massive problem where it's not really helping out the cause when it's mostly just Disney that is getting the crap, while most of the others are easily getting a pass. Even when the backlash they have received, they can easily just brush off and they can continue their thing. But if I have to go and point out possibly the strongest example, at least as I'm recording this, of how the Disney hate is going way too far and how it's honestly to the point where it's pretty clear that it is rather forced, it has to be with Hexed. Now, I just want to go and clarify, as I am recording this, Hexed has not been released in theaters yet. Yet ever since it was first announced, the cartoon community, or again, the toxic side of the cartoon community, was ready to go and absolutely hate on it. And whatever they would go and reveal about it, they want to use that as an excuse to say that it is absolutely terrible and try to go and frame it as the next citizen vigilante or something like that. Like, no joke, like ever since like it was first revealed and we only had a vague description of what the movie would be about, there was already controversy, there was already backlash, and somehow it was already enough for some people in the community to just go rage out and be massively upset over basically a broad concept of an upcoming feature. And you can tell right now that it has really gotten so bad to the point that now they are straight up using conspiracy theories and misinformation in order to find an excuse to go and hate on Hex. Rather it be with the whole conspiracy that somehow this is Disney's revenge on Dana Terrence because of how she is critical towards Disney and making a new series with Knights of Guinevere, so they want to make their own witch series to go and replace the Owl House for some reason, even though none of that makes any sense whatsoever. And Dana Terrence is still working for Disney, especially with that Owl House comic that she has been developing with the people there. And then you have the whole drama when Disney revealed the character designs of the main characters, and apparently that alone is enough for the community to throw a massive temper tantrum because Disney is still maintaining its signature style, and apparently that seems to be a massive sin where it's not okay to do so, and that is enough to go and label it as horrible animation or an insult to the medium and an insult to cinema or whatever. Basically taking such a minor aspect and try to really make this entire controversy over it for some reason. And that's going to be another factor that I will go and mention, by the way, because the cartoon community is such masters of making a mountain out of a molehill. And then there's just straight up lies that they would go and use and try to accuse Disney of using AI for Hexed, or that it's going to be presented in vertical screens or whatever. Basically at the point where now they're just making things up to find a reason to go and hate on Hex, and that they want to go and call it one of the worst animated films without even actually experiencing it themselves or even waiting until the full movie gets released before they could go and actually make a full judgment on it. And again, this is not to go and say that Hexed doesn't deserve to be criticized whatsoever. There are some things in terms of the clips that they have shown so far where, yeah, it does deserve a few criticisms, or it doesn't look like the best thing that they have come out in years or whatever. There are some things that can be criticized. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. But the big problem is that with all the outbursts and all the controversies that the community is trying to go and fabricate with it, but the biggest drawback with the behavior of the community, and especially with the way that they really want to force out their hatred on Hex, is that it delegitimizes whatever criticism is out there. It really is a matter of boy who cried wolf, where they're basically screaming out nonsense to go and say that Hex is bad. But when you actually do see that the nonsense is nonsense, then the criticism is ultimately just not worth listening. I mean, I've heard so many stupid arguments against Hex where it's just proven to not actually be true whatsoever, that it honestly turns me off from hearing whatever criticism can be expressed from it. If you're not going to be respectful with your thoughts, then at that point, you're not worth listening to. There's nothing really to go and hear, especially when they're at the point where they're flat out just disrespecting the animators. That really, they're not really hurting Disney at that point. They're just hurting the creative people behind the scenes that just wants to go and make an entertaining movie. And that's it. In fact, if you want to have proof in which their little quote-unquote activisms is actually hurting artists and animators more so than it actually is hurting executives and companies, then look no further than the whole leak of Avatar Aang. You probably remember back in April when Avatar Aang, The Last Airbender, ended up getting completely leaked online. And there are some people in the community who took this as a moment of activism against Paramount, especially when they were massively upset over the decision of moving that movie from theaters to just Paramount Plus, which, yeah, I do agree, it is a rather stupid decision. And from there, they felt like it was a victorious moment for the fans, that they can have a moment to stick it to Paramount and say that we're winning this situation. This is to show that you made a stupid decision, Paramount, and all that kind of stuff. But ultimately, what ended up happening is that this ultimately harms the animators. This harms the artists who have actually worked on it, where they spent years creating Avatar Aang only for it to ultimately just be unceremoniously displayed as just a little trend. And whatever surprises that they have in store and that they wanted to go and present, well, now it's all ruined because those toxic fans just want to go after Paramount, but don't see the real harm that they are causing to the artists and animators. That's why often their anger would cloud their perspective, where they're just so targeted at the anger towards the companies that they don't see the harm that they are doing towards others either. And this is not even to mention that when the movie did get released, suddenly there was the whole controversy where it was revealed that there was one artist that may have used ChatGPT in order to do research in terms of the character designs. And then from there, it just went and kind of repeated the whole process of this entire controversy, where the whole situation was just blown up, especially from the fandom. And then from there, the people who end up getting the biggest L are the artists and animators behind the scenes. It just suddenly feels like we just see this rinse and repeat process, especially because of this type of reactionary anger, where they're so focused on trying to go after the enemy, which in this case here is ChatGPT and AI, to the point that they just don't realize about who they're hurting along the way. Unintentionally, sure, but Still, though, they're leaving their actions to be unchecked through their anger to the point that they don't realize the amount of harm that they are causing, and they end up actually hurting more so than actually doing good for their own cause in the first place. So at that point, if they end up making themselves look bad with that piece of activism when trying to go after Paramount, imagine how they look whenever they would try to go after Disney. Because a lot of the times they end up hurting the artists and animators more so than they actually are harming the company, regardless of whatever intention they may have. If their activism actually does work, if their hatred towards films like with Wish or Moana 2 or the live action remakes, what have you, if they actually do work, Disney would honestly be in a much worse position than they are right now. So safe to say that their attacks are unfortunately not very effective. Well, that's going to do it for this part. But keep in mind that this is only the beginning in terms of discussing about the problems with the cartoon community, and I have yet to get into the worst ones. Tune in next time as I'm going to go even deeper into the problems with the animation as cinema mantra and how it's ultimately turning the cartoon community less as an animation fandom and more like a group of gatekeepers. Some of the subjects we'll be looking into then includes how populism is now taking over the community, where now the only thing that's keeping them alive is just having a common enemy to keep up the narrative of the people versus the corporate elite. We'll also be looking into why they don't actually understand what is indie animation, their dependence on nostalgia, how they actually treat artists and animators in the industry, and how harassment is unfortunately becoming more and more of a common issue every time that there is a controversy that is related to an animated project. So with all that said, thank you for watching, and until next time.